Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War news update, first of two, for the 3rd of August 2023. This is the penultimate day before I'm on holiday. I should be able to get my Friday videos out okay, or at least some of them. A couple of them, probably the news one. We'll see how it goes tomorrow. But nonetheless, today is good to go. So let's get on with it. And we'll go to where we normally start, which is the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, and fairly high figures across a number of these categories. 620 KIA for the Russian troops there. That is higher than we've seen recently, not as high as the highest rates of over 1,000 that we've seen in the past, but certainly a number that's a little bit of an uptick. 7 tanks, 21 APVs. So there's obviously some activity going on the front lines that is causing this high number of armored vehicles and mechanized equipment to be taken out. 26 artillery systems and 4 MLRS multiple launch rocket systems is a high number again in this category. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems is going to be useful, as you can see from the average there, or from the total. That is less than 1 a day on average across the war. So 2 in 1 day is a good day for the Ukrainians. 35 drones. That's not from last night, but from the night before. 23 vehicles and fuel tanks. Yet again, significant impact on the Russian logistics, no doubt. And 3 pieces of special equipment. So I think that is a good day for the Ukrainians. They have. We're going to have a look into this. New York Times reports on this. I've been saying this for days. Most analysts have been that Ukraine changed their tactics and they're now just mainly doing attritional distance stuff, whilst also kind of probing and prodding here and there, and also trying to deal with Russian counterattacks in places. We are just waiting for the point where they have attrited the Russians enough that they then go for a large overwhelming attack in at least one location, right? But we are still in this attritional phase, and goodness, the Russians are being attrited. Now, I've talked about Andrew Perpetua doing what Oryx does, but possibly on more of a ad hoc basis. It's not his main thing to do, but he is in a good position to do this because he reviews. I think he spends all day, every day, doing. I mean, I spend enough time doing this at the expense of almost all other aspects of my life. And I see a lot of stuff, but I think Andrew Perpetua spends all day working on his map by looking at all the available evidence. And so he's in a really good position actually to be able to get a handle on how much equipment is being destroyed from both sides. And he's not biased at all. He just says it like it is. So he may be pro-Ukrainian, a bit like me in his moral outlook, but he's never one to shy away from looking at the data. And yesterday was more of a parity in equipment. Today, you can see the Russians have lost a lot more. And it's interesting to see the type of stuff. So quite a lot of artillery. And I don't think so the Ukrainians claim to take out 20 plus bits of Russian artillery a day, sometimes 40 a day, sometimes like mid-teens, but always, I think on average, you're seeing above 20 pieces a day. And we are seeing only a fraction of that in terms of released footage. So that's, you might ask, why is that? But I think of all the bits of equipment you're going to see footage of getting destroyed, it's probably least likely you're going to see artillery because it's much further behind the lines. And quite often it's done by counter battery fire. So it's not that it's being spotted by drones above, but actually being done by working out the trajectory of the incoming artillery and then using your radars to pinpoint the coordinates of that and then hitting that with artillery. The question is, well, how do you know you've taken that artillery out, and so on and so forth? So there are lots of questions in that, but nonetheless, you can see there's quite a substantial number of artillery pieces in his list, and a lot of tanks, and a few APVs, quite a few APVs, which is to include infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers and MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. So, and then a lot of trucks. So, this, I think, helps to defend the picture being painted by the general staff. Now, the Ukrainians haven't lost an insignificant number of pieces of equipment. They have lost quite a few tanks there. But what's always uh, interesting is looking at the type of tank. So all of their tanks are T-64s or unknown. So those aren't your those are probably from your older, more established battalions, brigades, not the newly formed ones that are going to be used for the counteroffensive, the larger attacks. So I think that tells you something. But anyway, Iris T SLM launcher is a huge problem. That's damaged. So you'd hope that's fixable. That's a fairly decent bit of kit that has been. It's not huge. It's not like a Patriot, but it is. It is a shame when something like that gets taken out. So anyway, that's the list from Andrew Perpetua. We have another Mi-8 helicopter. Although this is, I don't know the military angle here, but it is in Russia. Another one has crashed. So this is the third in Russia, I think, in the last few weeks. 6 people died, 13 passengers on board in Tungur Ostkoksinski. Three are in serious condition, four in moderate condition. So that is among them a citizen in Belarus. So make of that what you will. It's just we have seen a number of helicopters go down recently in Russia. An interesting story is going around in Ukraine's social media channels today, alleging that in Mariupol, 2 Russian soldiers have died after being poisoned by Patriots. They were said to be part of a group of 17 officers hit by the I Group. However, I cannot verify these claims, says Tim White. The I Group is a Patriot group, a partisan group operating in, well, certainly around Mariupol, as you can tell, but around the occupied territories of Ukraine. They're called I because it's a letter that is not in the Russian Cyrillic alphabet, so they use that as say, look, we're definitely Ukrainian because we're, or they're using that letter because it symbolizes what Ukrainian has and Russia doesn't have, at least in their language. So yeah, they are active, and in that case, assassinating some Russian officers there. Now, I talked to you yesterday about there being over a dozen instances in the last sort of 48 hours yesterday of arson on particularly conscription offices. Here we have another attempted arson by on an army registration building in Russia, and it's another pensioner. Quite often, it appears that there are older people doing this. It happened in Volgograd. 82-year-old Rima Vitrova has already confessed, despite the fact she was arrested before having a chance to throw her Molotov cocktail. So, yeah, just that is a really common occurrence at the moment in Russia, and I think that that's good for the Ukrainians. It really shows that there is potentially a change in public attitude afoot. Okay, moving on to strikes here, distant strikes. Here we have 15 out of 15 Shahed drones launched last night from the Bryansk region in Russia were shot down, and then another 7 reconnaissance drones were also down by the Air Force Air Defense yesterday. So that is a significant number of drones again. 100% interception rate, that is good. If they're coming in from the north, there is pretty decent air defense around there. You've got Kyiv close by, and so they seem to have much more success, the Ukrainians, in taking out Russian aerial targets in the north than they do sort of attacking places like Odessa and the south. So, okay, lots of explosions going on yesterday and continuing today, as ever, and that happens every day. So, explosions reported in Kievsky district in occupied Donetsk, and that was last night. So, I never know with Donetsk whether it is shelling because it's close enough to hit with some artillery, or whether it's HIMARS and other maybe Storm Shadows, other aerial threats in Primorsk, west of Mariupol. So it's on the coast between Mariupol and Berdyansk. West of Mariupol, explosions and audible detonations are reported. That's from this morning. And near the border with Crimea, a powerful explosion was heard in the Kananchak district, Berdyansk. So all along these sort of southern areas, again, this is from this morning, they are being hit. Uh, just the Russians moved things back out of HIMARS range, and now they're in Storm Shadow range. And I think Ukraine are just systematically going through that which has been moved back and hitting them with Storm Shadow. And of course, in places like Berdyansk, Mariupol, they have nowhere else to go. There's a sea, so you can't move it further back. You can only take it out of the occupied territories as a whole, and then you're moving your stuff back to Russia, and then now we're starting to see Russia being targeted itself by Ukrainian drones. Reports of big problems for Russia again in occupied Zaporizhia, starting with a now legendary Tokmak. So a fire is raging after pinpoint strikes on the invaders and their equipment. Tokmak is routinely just hammered every single day. I'm surprised there's any left of military um, military type in the Tokmak area, because it's just routinely shafted by the aerial bombardments. Meanwhile, explosion tonight in Melitopol as well. So all of those major hubs in the occupied south are being consistently hit. The mayor of Melitopol, even Ivan Fedorov, reports explosions in the city center of Melitopol. That was last night. And local channels in the Belgorod region in Russia reported explosions. Governor Gladkov said air defense shot down aerial objects, although it is not yet clear what was actually shot down, if so. So that is the what's been going on, um, with drones and missiles. In other bits of news, other bits and pieces to do with the military project of the Russians, the armed forces of Ukraine have changed their counteroffensive tactics. The Russian army is overstretched and is beginning to retreat. So this is New York Times talking about stuff that I've been saying every day. I mean, it's nothing new particularly. They changed their tactics after the initial week of the counteroffensive. They've now been accused of being too slow, but it is, like I said yesterday, take however long it takes. And someone's saying, well, that says nothing, it's unfalsifiable, whatever. But it literally is, it's a process, right? And so artificially putting a time requirement on that is problematic, because then you end up rushing things. It will take as long as it takes, and they need to complete this attritional phase now, where they're taking out the artillery so that they can use their ground forces, so they can move mechanized equipment in through minefields, negotiate those obstacles, breach the obstacles without the fear of being hit from above by by two things. Firstly, by artillery, and secondly, by helicopters. I think this is going to be one of the main challenges going forward. Is how do they take out those Ka-52 attack helicopters that are still really active? I was saying there isn't too much footage I've seen, but there is footage. If you look for it, of the Ka-52 still active along the southern front line, taking out targets. Anyway, New York Times says that Ukrainian military command has changed tactics, focusing on wearing down Russian troops with artillery and long-range missiles instead of storming minefields under fire. Absolutely sensible. Troops are building up in the south of the country, and a second wave of Western trained forces is launching mostly small-scale attacks to break through Russian defense lines. And of course, this gets people jittery because they think they're going to run out of time. It's going to be autumn soon. What's a prognosis? But of course, yes, you adapt to. I mean, this is warfare. Adaptation is a massive component of battlefield success, and the Ukrainians are adapting. They're doing what they need to do. Yes, they might not be where many Western analysts thought they would be or thought they should be by now, but so be it. Deal with it. They are doing this in the best way they possibly can, considering they haven't been given air frames. They don't have air advantage, let alone air superiority, let alone air supremacy. So when NATO analysts say, well, you're not here and you're not there, it's like, yeah, but NATO would never be doing this without air supremacy. So, there is that. Preparing new brigades. I don't know if this is from the same article in the New York Times, but preparing new brigades for a counteroffensive. Ukraine created an extensive system of medical evacuation in 4 directions. This speaks to the asymmetry that is evident between the Ukrainians and Russians, where the Russians don't have, it seems, the medical logistics in place to be able to support their troops that are injured, to the point where we routinely hear that. And there was another interview that I was watching where they just said, yeah, they shoot their they shoot their wounded. They just walk up and shoot their wounded in the frontline areas because they just don't have. I mean, obviously, that's not going to be like fully happening every single instance, but it's something that does happen. I saw another video yesterday of a Russian wounded chap who was extracted, who was evacuated from the front line, and he was like, "This is brilliant. The lad saved me." And it was almost as if that was a miracle. Like it doesn't normally happen. Um, and so you piece all these things together, and you think like Russia also they just don't have the staging points for medical evacuation, where you get taken just behind the lines, you get sorted out, stop the blood loss. Right now, we're going to take you to a field hospital further back, and then from there you can be taken to a main hospital in a city, way back in the west or wherever. So Russia don't have that system, and it's not to say the Ukrainian system is perfect, but they're starting to get these tourniquets as much as possible to the front lines and get troops trained in what to do in the first 5 minutes to stop that blood flow, to get your comrades sorted, and then move to the next point, and then moved on and moved on. Ukraine they have things in place much more than the Russians. And this includes 20 city hospitals, many stabilization points, and up to stabilization point. Now it's a word, and up to 50 medical units in brigades. So it's not perfect, but it is improving, and it is markedly better than the Russian provision. And so therefore, you get a lot of Russian KIA that should be WIA, should be wounded in action, and they become killed in action because they don't have that medical provision. And so the percentage chance of dying on the battlefield if you're wounded and Russian is much higher than if you're wounded and Ukrainian. The head of the military hospital in Zaporizhia, Roman Kuziv, says that the system is operating at 20% of its capacity, which is good, right? So it has another 80% left in the tank. So when we start getting these large scale attacks that we're not seeing at the moment, then hopefully there is the capacity in this medical logistics chain to be able to deal with that. The question is, do the Russians have that? The purpose of this system is to provide assistance within the first 25 minutes after an injury. A medic on the front line quickly provides first aid. So that is good news there. Right. Now, the other day I showed you this, and this was going around. It's actually been geolocated now. I don't know whether this means this definitely isn't happening around the Kerch Bridge. So this was the claim that they are putting anti-drone barrages up around the Kerch Bridge to stop the Kerch Bridge being hit by maritime drones. It turns out the picture here is actually Sevastopol Harbor, where these are put in the harbor to stop the maritime drones being used on moored ships in the harbor. Now, I was saying, well, this is a good idea for the Kerch Bridge, and I'm amazed it's taken so long. Well, it appears it's not happening, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do try and do that. I don't know if it's feasible to put these across that stretch of water. I don't know what the implications are, what the variables are, but that is what is happening in Sevastopol and not Kerch. Uh, Russian Ministry of Defense has begun the distribution of anti-drone and assault weaponry to at least 7 battalions of territorial defense forces that have reportedly been formed in the Belgorod region of Western Russia. The forces have also received UAZ off-road vehicles. Now, this is in response to, this is Peskov here, this is in the Financial Times, in response to the threat of Ukrainian drones. The Russians are really, really feeling that. And, you've had Moscow being hit. So one of their options is to, hey, give their general population guns and vehicles to be able to shoot down these drones. So that is what they're doing. They're creating anti-drone units, which again, adaptation. That is a sensible thing for them to do, arguably, although giving a bunch of uh, bunch of guns to civilians is maybe not the best idea, but it also indicates how much of a threat they see these drones as presenting. Um, this is a report that's come out. This is being talked about quite a lot in the media at the moment. Russia carries out forced systematic passportization in occupied territory, something that's been talked about, but I've talked about this previously throughout the war. We hear about this, but another report on it. Russia is systematically coercing residents of the occupied parts of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia Oblast to accept Russian passports. The Conflict Observatory reported on August the 2nd. Ukrainians living in the occupied territories, quote, are subjected to threats, intimidation, restrictions on humanitarian aid and basic necessities, and possible detention or deportation, the Yale University researcher said. Now, the question is always, when we come across stuff like this, always I say, my good Russian voices in the threads, you know who you are, Clive Engel, Frankie B, Solid Faux Life, all these kind of Russian trolls. The question is this liberation? Is this what you're standing for? Is this liberty? Forcing people to adopt an identity, coercing them to adopt a national identity that they don't want to take, and forcing them to do that because if you don't do that, you don't get food, you don't get this, you don't get that, you don't get any rights unless you take on this Russian passport. And that is how you create a situation where, hey, all of these people are Russian. I mean, it's either a case of moving your own population into these places like Crimea, Donbass, and so there are literally Russians there, or it's making those people, forcing them to be Russian by coercion. And then when you do a uh, a vote or referendum as to whether you guys should want to be part of Russia or part of Ukraine, uh, you are Russian. And by the way, if you don't vote that way, yeah, intimidation, so on and so forth. So it's all part of the Russian way of doing things, I guess. Here is news of ex-Wagner mercenary Igor Sofonov being arrested after 2 months of I guess coming back from Ukraine for killing 6 people. Who killed a father and a son in one house and 3 men and a woman in another. Then he tried to burn both houses down to hide the evidence. And Russia let these people walk on the streets as free men in exchange for the crimes they committed. Russia is a country where terrorists are treated as heroes, says this source. And this is a problem that we have seen a number of times, which is convicts being arrested, imprisoned for horrific crimes, being given a chance to go free if they go and serve for 6 months in Ukraine for Wagner and other private military companies, actually now, going and doing that, and then Russia having to come good on their promises, letting them go free. And then you've got a bunch of essentially psychopaths or known criminals or people that don't have the skill set to reintegrate into society because of rehabilitation services in Russia. I'm sure in the prison services are not good, and you just got a very bad situation. These people often, I presume, free to go back to the communities they have already damaged, and that has caused them to go to prison in the first place. Just it's a recipe for disaster. That anyway. Thank you so much for watching. That's the first part of today's news video. Please like, subscribe, and share. I will get back to you very soon with part 2. Toodle pips.